In the late 1940s, many navies found themselves with a sudden need to draw down forces. The grand fleets that had ground down Japan, or escorted convoys across the Atlantic, were surplus to requirements. This would see the cancellation of many projects and ships, with numerous vessels laid up on the stocks or outright scrapped in place. This was nowhere more evident than in USS Hawaii, at least on the American side of things. The final ship in the Alaska class, this cruiser was the victim of the post-war budget cuts. Construction would, at a very slow pace, continue on her until 1947. By the time it was stopped, Hawaii was around 82 to 84% complete, with her main battery fitted and much of her superstructure work complete. However, she lacked her secondary battery and much of the finer detail work. With her sisters laid up as too expensive in both cost and manpower, Hawaii was in a state of limbo. The Alaskas were considered not worth keeping in service, as they were, so there was no reason for the Navy to finish Hawaii as designed. Conversely, it was equally expensive to convert her into a new role, with so many surplus and more cost-effective cruisers floating around. The end result is that Hawaii would never be completed and would, ultimately, be sent to the scrapper's torch without ever sailing under her own power. But that wouldn't be worth a video. Let's take a look at those various proposed conversions and what Hawaii might have looked like had the stars aligned in her favor. First laid down on December 20th, 1943, Hawaii was delayed multiple times from steel shortages and changing priorities. As a result, she would only be launched on November 3rd, 1945, after the war she was built for had already ended. As said before, this would lead to construction slowing to a crawl, before being cancelled altogether in 1947, as the Navy looked for a new role to give to the cruiser. Mostly because, in line with the similarly incomplete USS Kentucky, she was the largest surface combatant available for conversion, without completely tearing apart a complete ship, that is. Now, the most common plan would be some flavor of missile cruiser conversion. There were varying plans here, ranging from a massively oversized equivalent of USS Albany's conversion to a bizarre aircraft carrier hybrid. These conversions were considered seriously enough that by the time Hawaii was sent to the reserve fleet, her 9 12-inch guns had already been removed. She would spend the rest of her time afloat without any weapons at all because of this. All the while, the Navy would create and discard their conversion plans for Hawaii. Of these, the wackiest of the bunch is arguably the first idea. This conversion, SCB-26A, was for an experimental test ship. A missile cruiser, yes, but one fitted out like an unholy hybrid of missile cruiser and aircraft carrier. Hawaii was sketched with a short flight deck forward, with experimental missiles fitted alongside the superstructure, and less experimental 3-inch 70 caliber cannon joining them. The forward half of the ship was, in this regard, somewhat forward-thinking, especially for the late 1940s. Though it wasn't immediately obvious what that flight deck was intended for. It was only 256 feet long, far shorter than even an escort carrier. To be fair, it was fitted with a catapult off a modernized Essex, as well as the ability to launch the American copy of the V-1 missile. But, even with that, I don't think that short of a deck was much use, especially for landings. That said, it was the after end of the ship where things really got strange. In place of a full-length flight deck, Hawaii was instead equipped with launch tubes for V-2 missiles. Tubes that were, in fact, big enough to be future-proofed for missiles as much as 50% larger than the V-2. The intention, as of when the conversion was greenlit, was for Hawaii to carry up to 50 V-2s and 100 XPM missiles. The latter missiles were an early stage in the development of what would become the Talos missile. As you could guess, this was a tad optimistic. Fueling these early missiles was a pain, with incredibly volatile liquid fuels. Not exactly a great thing on a warship, which has enough fire and explosion hazards as it is. Toss in the limited guidance systems available, and the Navy made the sensible decision to cancel the conversion. USS Mississippi could serve as a missile test ship, with much less cost and risk. As such, with the only result of this plan being the removal of her 12-inch guns, Hawaii was sent to reserve. She would languish there while various other missile cruiser plans came and went. An early attempt at the start of the 1950s was designed around the Terrier missile. This conversion was projected to cost something like $62 million, all told, which is not exactly cheap. However, this plan was pushed aside in favor of a command ship conversion with little real work done. Details on the command ship are also somewhat sparse, though the plan was evidently for something similar to USS Northampton, just on a larger and grander scale considering the larger size of Hawaii. This plan didn't last very long, as things turned out, because the Navy wanted to see what experience operating Northampton gave them. I have seen references to the design carrying no fewer than 16 5-inch 54 caliber guns, and details of her radar fitting as well. However, as I'll comment at the end of the video, I'm not sure I trust that particular source. Friedman makes no mention of her conversion plan, other than the aforementioned supersized Northampton. In any event, while Hawaii would be redesignated to CBC-1 in preparation for the conversion, it was ultimately pushed aside. The carrier USS Wright would, instead, take up position alongside Northampton as a far cheaper conversion. Hawaii reverted to CB-3 in September 1954. For 3 more years, she would remain in mothballs, waiting for any further conversion plans. She certainly wasn't getting her old guns back by that point. In early 1957, however, the final conversion plan came up. This one took the old V2 idea and expanded upon it by replacing Hawaii's stern turret with 20 Polaris missiles. These were safer missiles, more advanced and far more deadly. After all, the V2 was a conventional missile. Polaris was an ICBM equipped with a nuclear warhead. In support of these, the cruiser was planned to mount 2 Talos launchers, one on the bow and one aft of the superstructure. That superstructure would have resembled a larger version of Albany's bridge, which makes this the oversized Albany that I brought up at the start. Rounding out the planned weaponry were 2 twin Tartar launchers, one on either side of the ship by the bridge, as well as an ASROC, anti-submarine rocket launcher, ahead of the bridge. There were other sketches as well, including one with 4 Tartar launchers and 4 Regulus cruise missile launchers. What all of these have in common, however, was a high cost. Hawaii didn't carry a heavier conventional missile armament than an equivalent heavy cruiser conversion, on a much larger and more expensive ship. While the Polaris missiles were a difference in capability, the Navy was already moving to only fitting those weapons on submarines, which could carry more, safer, than a cruiser could. Not that it stopped the Italians from doing it anyway with Garibaldi, but that's a topic for a different video I have already done. For the moment, with the failure of this final conversion plan, Hawaii's fate was sealed. Aging and too expensive to keep around, she was removed from the Naval Register in June 1958. By 1959, she was sold for scrap, which commenced in 1960. It's a sad fate for Hawaii, really. So close to completion, only to languish for a decade as plans came and went. Some bright spots would come up, some hope for her to see service, but they never went anywhere. A shame, if you ask me, but then I like the looks of these ships. That being said, a final note before I end this video. I have seen some reference to a full-on carrier conversion being the first plan. SCB-26 compared to SCB-26A. However, this comes from a fairly new book that seems to have been self-published. I'll still provide a link to the Amazon page, but with a very heavy caveat that I would not trust it. Not least because it doesn't seem to be available for sale anywhere, not even eBay. I'm not going to say it's a lie, but without any way to check the reference, and with Friedman making no note of a full carrier conversion, I would not put much stock in it. The wiki page did, but I would call this another case of Wikipedia as good as a gateway source, but always check the citations, if it even has any. This is also where the weapon layout for her command ship conversion came from. All told, Friedman's U.S. cruisers may be an older source before it was recently reprinted, but I would trust it far more. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.